Welcome, everyone, back to the Divine Feminine Healers podcast. I'm super excited to have the great wisdom of Dr. Marianne Teitelbaum, who is an Ayurvedic practitioner and chiropractor for over 30 years, and an Ayurvedic practitioner I recently has started going to, and I'm just super excited to have you on. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, a question that I ask all of my guests, because I find it's so profound how each of us can have such a unique relationship with the divine feminine. I would love to hear from you how you connect with the divine feminine.
In Ayurveda, we all start out the day with what's called dinacharya. It means it's a daily routine, things we do through the day. So what I do when I first wake up, I do some little yoga so I can move the prana through the body, so I can have a greater connection to that pure being, that essence of whatever you want to call it, divine feminine. And I do a meditation, and then I do some prayers where I do connect with the divine feminine, whether it's Mother Mary, I have her picture here on my altar, and Mother Divine, and all those other beings who can help me to help my patients get well, and also help me to, be well and is the most enlightened I can become, to contact that deep divinity that's within all of us. In Ayurveda, they say it's in a seed form, but it can grow like a seed. And that's what we need to do our whole life through good daily routine, good diet, cleansing techniques, so that the divine can vibrate more in our physiology.
Those are beautiful practices. I love that coming back to body is one of them. I find that that is such a huge practice for me connecting with the divine feminine. And I love how you also connect with your spiritual team, however you want to call it. And it's so interesting that you brought in so that you can also be in service to your clients. I'm so curious. Do you ever recognize that there's this connection between the ancestors' spirit team that you work with and that of your clients? And how does that relationship really work?
I think any great healer would tell you that whatever it is that they're healing with, it's coming through them. It's not that they are healing that person, but this connection with the divine, whatever you might want to call it. So there are so many beings, we could say, that are celestial, that are really talking to us all the time, whether or not we can hear them, whether it's our guardian angels or job angels or other celestial beings. My teacher from India, who sat with me for 20 years, he came from a very divine lineage of Ayurveda called Shakavasya Ayurveda. And when he would see a patient, he would take the person's pulse, close his eyes, and he would contact them, and they would tell him what to do. So I contact them every day after my meditation when I know that my thoughts kind of cleared away, my mind has cleared, and I'm at that transcendent level of life where everything's teeming with infinite possibilities, and we bring that out into daily life. So that's one of my prayers, and just putting my attention on that these beings who are still surrounding us can help me to help my patients get well, whether it's Dr. Mishra's family lineage or other people. Padre Pio was a great healer. He could touch people, they were healed. So all the healers that I have read about and admired through my life, I contact them every day. And I know they're here helping me to support my patients.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I'm so curious how you first started to build your Ayurveda practice in the beginning, and what was that catalyst to eventually create your own practice?
One thing my teacher from India told me was, in the Shastras, in the ancient textbooks, it said that the great healers themselves would be sick. So they would know what it was like, and they had to figure out how to get well. And that's what happens to a lot of healers if you ask them. I know Lyme disease specialists, they got Lyme, no one could help them. So they became really great at diagnosing and treating Lyme because the other doctors don't know how to do it. So that's what happened to me. At a young age, I wasn't feeling well. So my mother would take me to doctors, and they would say there's nothing wrong with her. And it got to the point where they were saying it must be in her head. And my mother said, that's odd because I have 4 kids and she's my most balanced one. And we had a great family life growing up. And, I'm still best friends with my siblings like that. And so one of the doctors said, you should take her to a psychiatrist because I think it's in her head. So I was just 16 at the time. And she took me there and he said to me, well, do you not get along with your parents? And I said, oh, no, we always get along. My father's a woodworker. We're always in the basement making all kinds of fun wood things and swings and chairs. And he said, well, what about your mother? I said, she's my best friend. When she goes to work, I clean the house so that when she comes home, it's nice and clean for her. And he said, well, what about your siblings? I said, no, we're also like best of friends. And all their friends come over. Our house is like the meeting house where everybody comes because it's such a happy household. So he said, well, what about your boyfriend? And I was only 16 at the time. I said, well, I don't have one yet. And he said to my mother, that's what our problem is. She's suffering depression because she doesn't have a boyfriend. And I remember it was a turning point in my life, having been to all these doctors who said nothing was wrong with me, and then having someone tell my mother I was depressed. I walked out of there. I remember looking up at the trees. It was a sunny day. It was autumn. It was a beautiful day. And I said, I'm done. I'm done with doctors. I don't know what I'm going to do, but this, we're not getting anywhere. So from that, at that time, it was the 1970s. Ayurveda hadn't come to our shores yet. So I kind of dabbled in, taking vitamins and going down that path, which really didn't work because it's the synthetic version of the real things. It made me sicker. And then Ayurveda came, and then I could see that what I had were a bunch of imbalances that, because they're not diseases, doctors don't know how to treat that. They're only trained to diagnose and treat disease. So they were making me feel like it was in my head, that I was mentally ill. And then I got so healthy, and it inspired me to want to help others to get well as well. But I had to go through that. That was probably preordained that I go through that.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
always the initiation process for all healers that we
Yep.
have to go down that path, but it really becomes like we become the specialist of that specific imbalance. And I'm sure you started to attract specific clients who had a lot of that same story, and because you become such a master at it. When did you make that decision? Because we have a lot of people in our community who are on that antithesis of maybe transitioning jobs and really wanting to set up their own practice. When did you know or answer the call to make that switch?
Um, that was in the very late 1970s. And I went on a meditation retreat for a couple weeks, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I remember meditating several hours every day. And one day I said, oh my God, it's so obvious what I want to do. So I had to go back to school, because what I do, I treat very serious diseases. And you can't do that if you just learn Ayurveda. You have to have a medical degree, whether it's MD, DC. I got a DC degree because I knew I would never be using modern medicine. So I got that degree. And then I was really fortunate at the time that I graduated, it was 1984. I graduated chiropractic college. The first wave of Vaidya's had come from India, like the very next month after, and they started training us. And then as time went on, I trained one-on-one internship with my teacher from India for 20 years.
Oh, wow. And so in those initial meetings with your teacher and learning from the Vaidyas, how is that different than any other prior training that you had?
Well, chiropractic training was somewhat similar. The problem is we're immersed in a culture that does not have a system of holistic medicine. We're a pretty new country. When you look at India, they've been there 10,000 years. We've been here a couple, 250. So their system of Ayurveda is about 5,000 years old. So here we have nothing. So because we don't really know most of our herbs or have any philosophy as to what holistic medicine means, we started using things which to us sounded natural, but they're not truly natural, like isolating active ingredients out of food, like B complex and L-tyrosine and glutamine, and thinking that that is holistic medicine. So that's not a path we want to go down. But that's the kind of training I received in chiropractic college. They said we need to do more natural things. So I learned that, and I learned all the nutraceuticals. The first year or two before I learned Ayurveda extensively, I started using them in my practice. And I watched the patients go downhill very rapidly. But I thought, again, I needed to go through that to see that this isn't the way either. And then fortunately, when they came, they started teaching me their herbs, their spices, their foods, and how to truly heal using remedies that are grown outside in nature. They have that energy of nature called prana. Prana is the vibration from the sun and the moon, hitting the food as it's growing outside, hitting those spices. And it gets infused in those foods, spices, and herbs so that when we take them into our bodies, it's that vibration that gives our cells their intelligence to perform all their functions and to communicate with each other. Everything on the inside of the body, there's thousands of communications and processes going on, teeming with activity, and it's all through vibration. And the initial vibration comes through prana. And then I realized no wonder our patients aren't getting well in America using what we think is holistic medicine, taking all these synthetic vitamins. And then once I kind of scrapped that idea and got onto more natural remedies, the patients really got well.
Mm. Yeah, it's so interesting to think of when we think of holistic medicine, yet the westernized view of it is still using the Western science approach of not only just treating the symptom, but isolating the properties of that herb into a compound just so that you can treat that specific function. But like you're so beautifully describing, and I always relate this to our disconnection to our relationship with the land as well, of not knowing where the food comes from or where the herb has comes from, and then wanting to isolate it and try to just pull apart the pieces that we think are going to be the most useful rather than seeing it at it as its whole thing. It's so interesting. It's like the same concept that gets cycled, but we get
Yeah.
stuck in our Western ways a lot of seeing.
Yeah. Well, that's all we know in this country. Modern medicine just took over once we moved here. We never really had a chance to learn our herbs. And I'm sure the American Indians weren't real, happy to share that with us either after we kind of pushed them aside. But so we were kind of on our own. And then modern medicine showed up with their pharmaceuticals. And at the time, the people who were giving the most money to set up the medical colleges, Carnegie and those, they said, we're going to set them up. Here's all this money that we have, but it has to be the way we view health. And we view it through petrochemicals. So they isolated the active ingredients in the herbs, made them in a lab, which doesn't mean they don't work. They do work, but they come with some side effects and some toxicity to the liver and kidneys. So then people came other people said, no, we don't like that approach. Let's use something more natural. But let's see, since we don't know our herbs, why don't we isolate the active ingredient out of the foods and make these amino acids? But their approach is similar. They don't realize it, where they're just isolating active ingredients. But it's not only the nutrients that they're using, these synthetic nutraceuticals, which also have side effects and are toxic to the liver and kidneys, but the approach, they tend to think that they'll do this massive blood work and we'll see what your deficiencies are, and then we'll give you the vitamins for all those deficiencies and your health should return. And that approach doesn't work because you get sick from taking all the vitamins. But it's more than just we're deficient in certain nutrients. There's all kinds of imbalances that we're entertaining at a much deeper level. And it's at a level that they can't cognize. Using blood work and CAT scans, they can't see it, so they're missing it. Yeah.
Definitely. I'm so curious because there seems to be a wave of conditions that we see over time in different themes. Are you noticing any themes of the current imbalances that your clients have been coming to you with, maybe like the past couple of weeks or month?
Oh yeah, it's not that. It's more like each generation. And
Mm,
what I see, because I've been doing this now for several generations, you get to see patterns.
right.
And what I'm seeing is that each generation's getting sicker than the last one.
Mm,
And it's because of the pharmaceuticals. I'm not here to blame them or anything, but we're in a time period where we know that the vaccines cured polio and that was great. And then they came out with more, and that was okay. By the 1970s, we had about 10. But after 1989, we had 35. And they're trying to give vaccines for every single disease that the kids should be getting. Some of these are mild. They should get chickenpox. They should get mumps. They should let their immune systems work. But if you look at the public health records from the 1940s, there were hardly any autoimmune diseases. Then when the first vaccine came out, and just so you know, I'm not anti-vax, and I don't like to be labeled that at all. And I would never tell a patient to not get a vaccine, but I have to tell you what I see in my practice every day. The first vaccine came out, you saw a little uptick in autoimmune diseases because the vaccine's telling your immune system, react. Here's measles, react. So they have to put what are called adjuvants in the vaccines to push your immune system. So how can you measure how much you're going to push it? Maybe it pushes it a little too hard, where the immune system has intelligence and it knows I attack viruses, bacteria, but I don't attack gluten, dairy, tree nuts. But what if you push it a little too hard, and now the immune system goes into this rage whenever you eat tree nuts, and you need an EpiPen every time you eat tree nuts, or peanut butter, or gluten. See, we never had gluten sensitivities when I was young. We never heard of Hashimoto's. Now it's such an epidemic. It's the #1 autoimmune disease. I'm not just blaming vaccines, although more and more have come out. And by 1989, there were 35, then flu shots, and now the COVID shots. And each one's pushing us deeper and deeper into some autoimmune and other things. But also, the typical case history I see is that the person took so many rounds of antibiotics. They destroy different parts of the immune system, especially the friendly bacteria in the gut, which stabilize the immune system. I see people taking birth control pills for 10, 20, 30 years. The doctors give them out like candy. They don't realize that they also destroy the whole digestive tract, the friendly bacteria in the gut, the liver, because everything you swallow, the liver has to process. So the liver's getting very toxic from all these chemicals of the birth control pill every day. And also the gallbladder, because the pill is a cholesterol laden, the hormones, the female hormones are cholesterol. So you're dumping all this cholesterol in the gallbladder every day, and it starts to give gallbladder problems. And that's your digestion right there. So I'm seeing people who can't digest food anymore. They have to avoid every single food except for a few. They're backed into a corner because they can't tolerate gluten, dairy, this thing, that thing. And it's only getting worse. We're seeing more autoimmune diseases, more of everything you can imagine, which we didn't see 40, 50, 100 years ago. So I'm hoping that my original hope was maybe doctors would listen to the holistic doctors saying, we're not opposed to the vaccines, we're not opposed to antibiotics, but could you limit them and be very careful and just use them when you really need to? And then when you do, give the remedies for the side effects of these things. Because from what I can see, everyone's left on their own. After they've been on the pill 20, 30 years and their body's completely ravaged, they have to pick up the pieces themselves because the doctors don't know the harm they just created. So these are the types of things that I see happening in my practice. It's coming more from the pharmaceuticals and than anything else that I can see.
It's so interesting because I always, and I talk about this with a lot of Ayurvedic practitioners, that communication, if we had that more with Western science, of at what point do we use their medicine? At what point is the client only open and wanting to use that medicine? But at what point are they simply just ignorant and unaware of all the other options that they could have? That do you see in our future a way where we can have Ayurveda really as primary preventative medicine? Then if and we need more, or that client does not want to go
Yeah.
down that route, we can.
That's right. So that's what I see happening. When I first opened my practice, there weren't many people interested in alternative medicine. Then it got to be like 40% of the population. Then it got to be half. Now we're well over half. And what I can see happening, again, from these trends, is that we are well on our way to people realizing, why don't I try the non-invasive approach first? And if that doesn't work, I can always rely and fall back on the more invasive, approach of modern medicine. But we have to learn how to use it wisely. We're not saying don't use it, because every one of us has probably had our lives saved from their medicines, antibiotics. In the past, we might have died from pneumonia. Now we won't necessarily die from it, things like that. But on the other hand, is it good to put a teenager on antibiotics for 3 years for acne, knowing full well they're going to get an autoimmune disease later in life? And I see that all day too. So we have to use these very carefully. But I do see a transition occurring where the younger generation has seen what has happened and they're not buying it anymore. And they're smart. And they're saying, nope, we're raising our kids on healthy food. We're not using vegetable oils because the doctor said they have no cholesterol and these are safe to use. This is what's clogging everyone's arteries. They got to see it firsthand. We're going to use good salt, good sugar. We're not going to use the white refined sugar anymore. We're going to use good quality olive oil, not the cheap stuff we have here in this country. And they're getting really like very savvy with their health. They're eating real healthy, and their children, they're cutting back on the amount of vaccines. Again, I've never once told anyone do not get vaccines, but at least cut down or space them out, or don't let your child take antibiotics 12 times in a year for strep. Try to break that cycle. So what it means is you have to be your own advocate right now. And you probably have to use both systems, a very natural system of healing that knows how to deal with the side effects of, the pharmaceuticals, because the doctors don't know how to do that. But sometimes you have to go to them if you break your leg and you need an operation, or, the list of things. So they're good for crisis care, but let's use this more for our general care to prevent disease. Yeah, that's what's happening now.
I love that you say we have to be our own advocate, because I really do think that is what the whole lesson in all this is how can you really trust your own intuition and your own inner knowing, which, the path of the healer already had it went down because they were probably denied in some way, shape, or form that their imbalances weren't real, or the way that they wanted to heal wasn't actually going to get them the results that they wanted. And that's at least been very much part of my journey is really trusting my intuition. And I can kind of like maybe distill that down to a lot of imbalances. It's always coming back to trusting your body. And for me personally, I work with a lot of women and a lot of women who have reproductive imbalances. And I'm curious, what are the themes that you notice with all the women with infertility to PCOS to amenorrhea? What is the common denominator?
With any disease that you see, like those you mentioned, they too right now are at epidemic levels. I can just show you this as an example, because again, I've lived on this earth for quite a number of decades now. When I was growing up, everyone on the block had 4, 5, 6, whatever amount of kids they wanted. The women stayed at home. I'm not saying they should do that, but then we had a revolution where women said, I'm not staying at home all day and taking care of children anymore. I'm going out into the workforce. So we became liberated. And that was good too. But when that happened, they could no longer have all these children. They became infertile. And in the 1970s, all these infertility clinics opened up. So what happened was they decided they were going to be these super women. They were going to work a 40-hour week and come home and do the cooking, laundry, cleaning, grocery shopping, raising the kids, the homework. And how much can the human body take? And any stressors that come into the body, the adrenal glands have to deal with them. The adrenals pump out cortisol and epinephrine and adrenaline, which shuts down your thyroid. So then a whole cascade of things starts to happen. When you shut down your thyroid, the gallbladder doesn't work. I wrote a whole book on the thyroid, and I have a whole chapter on the gallbladder, because every time I saw a thyroid patient, we automatically saw that the gallbladder wasn't working. So then when the gallbladder doesn't work, the bile that the gallbladder squirts every day has amazing benefits to your health. One of which is it gets rid of estrogen. So that's how smart your body is. Your body knows, estrogen made the hips grow at puberty, the breasts grow, it builds up the endometrium lining every month, but we don't want too much growth. So the liver will break it down, dump it in the bile, the gallbladder squirts it out. And so now you keep this ratio of estrogen to progesterone. When the thyroid doesn't work because there's too much stress, the gallbladder doesn't work, that bile sits there and it doesn't squirt into the intestines. The estrogen reabsorbs back into the body, and you wind up with a situation of high estrogen, low progesterone, and the estrogen starts feeding things. It builds up the endometrium lining, which you shed every month, and now you have a heavy flow that will never go away. You could also develop cysts on the ovaries. So they call it PCOS, polycystic ovary disease. So, and the list goes on and on from there. But the point I'm making is it's a cascade of events. So by the time I see people, there's 10, 12, 15, 20, 30 things we have to treat. It's no longer like, oh, this is a Vata imbalance. It's not that simple. Like today, someone said to me, what's my imbalance? And I said, oh my God, you have like 20 or 30 things. And I went back and reiterated all the things. Not that you can't fix them, but I want people to understand that we have to look at the whole picture. So with all those diseases, like modern medicine would say with PCOS, well, you should take something to lower your blood sugar, metformin, And then you should take, like progesterone, like or the birth control pill. They're treating it in the wrong way. They're not starting at the original source and then fixing that and then everything else. So, but
Mm.
that's what I see. Women also have lost touch with nature. That's like a secondary thing that we see, where the full moon, you would have your period. Our ancestors were outside all day. We're inside with computers, cell phones. That really throws you out of balance. And we have artificial lighting. It's the same thing with that. I'm grateful that we have artificial lighting, but it's also responsible for a lot of the imbalances we see, because our ancestors probably would have gone to bed around 8:30. That's about the time when the thyroid and the adrenals say, we're tired, we want to go to sleep. But because we have artificial lighting, we don't sense that, oh, the sun's going down and I need to go to bed. Instead, we say, oh, I can stay up as late as I want, 10, 11, 12. So the glandular system gets weak. In fact, they did that with animals. They shine lights on them. At night, you don't hear the birds outside. They're all sleeping. They automatically live in harmony with nature. And so they're automatically asleep. And then they wake up when nature wakes up, 4 or 5, 6 in the morning. That's what we should be doing. So by losing touch with that, those early research projects where they shine lights on the animals and birds to see what would happen to them, it affected their fertility
Mm.
because now the whole glandular system's weak. So how can you have a child build up in your body when your glandular system's weak? So we need to go to bed earlier, wake up earlier, get out in the sunshine more. And a big thing I see is, if you know anyone that's on the birth control pill, you have to make them get off that. That's going to stop the whole beautiful orchestrated cycle of all these beautiful hormones women have every month: luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, estrogen, progesterone, and it just brings it to a halt. And the body's losing that intelligence of the endocrine system. That's a very dangerous thing. There's other dangers of it too, but that's a big one, to throw off our cycles like that.
Definitely. Thank you for always listing all the nidanas, these causes, because you're right, like we'll be in this perpetual state of imbalance and continuing it unless we actually remove that. That's the first step always.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, of course, these lifestyle practices and the diet and lifestyle that you prescribe and the herbs are always just creating that environment and helping even more. And I think sometimes why people are adverse, or at least they have their objections to going into alternative medicine, is they want that quick fix, and holistic medicine does take more time. I would love to hear how have been the transformations that some of your clients who have had some of these imbalances we spoke on have had. How long does it take for them to heal?
Not as long as you would think. I mean, I'm describing all these imbalances, but I would say usually within the first 2 years or so. My typical, for instance, infertility, we could say. I had a couple come in. They said, we don't know which way to go. She never has any periods. She has polycystic ovary. She's overweight. Our diet is poor. But we could go to a clinic and they could pump her up with things to make her ovulate so she could get pregnant. I said, well, that's up to you. This is how I would do it. So they said, well, we'll try this, and if it doesn't work, we'll do that. So, and I just said to them, she has a lot of things out of balance in her body. So her body's very intelligent to make sure she doesn't get pregnant, because you don't want to be pregnant with all these imbalances. You're going to pass them on to the baby.
For sure.
So what they do, they force ovulation. They take all these eggs, and how strong are those eggs? How strong are the offspring when you forced the issue on someone who's very sick to
Mm.
have a child? So it's not a good path we want to go down. So with this woman, I told her, you have to go to bed early. Let's change your diet to a real healthy one. Let's overcome our aversion to cholesterol. These hormones are made out of cholesterol. I showed her the good cholesterols to have. And little by little, her health returned. And then her period started to come back for several months because it had gone away. We treated her thyroid. We fixed her gallbladder, all the things we see with PCOS. She started ovulating, and the next thing you know, she was pregnant. Yeah. And she had the baby. Now she's already had 2. See, so
Wow.
all that went away, but they were on the brink of thinking, let me do the IVF. that's not a guarantee either. That could also take a long time, but um, I think it's a little dangerous. I don't want to go into all the side effects of that, but it's a little dangerous using synthetic hormones that make things grow. At least our estrogen that's intelligent, it makes intelligent growth, like the breasts, the hips, the endometrium lining. But when you're dealing with synthetic hormones, the growth could be unintelligent, like a breast cancer. That's an unintelligent growth. So, or ovarian cancer. So we have to be careful when we use those synthetic drugs.
Mm. That is so helpful. There's so many women that I know who are trying to get pregnant that go through IVF. So just to even have that story of what is possible is extremely empowering. And I'm curious, have you ever experienced in your practice someone who, maybe they've tried all the diet and the lifestyle practices, let's say holistically and Ayurvedically to align, and then throughout their healing, it was some type of spiritual cause, or maybe it was like a relationship or it needed to be a career change, and that actually was the healing that needed to take place in order for them to transform their imbalance?
Anything can be, any kind of stressor that gets taken away, it'll help to take the load off that endocrine system, because that's the system, it deals with stress every day. So I guess by the time I see people, they have so many imbalances that I haven't seen where it was just this one thing and it was easy and they said, oh, good, I got rid of the stressor. But more like I had another example of this. A woman couldn't get pregnant, and she was very Vata. She didn't realize it, talking all the time. She was weakening her own endocrine system, and I had the hardest time to try to help her unwind her nervous system. And I knew that until we could do that, that she wouldn't be able to get pregnant. And I tried my hardest to make her see that she was creating the problem. And she couldn't stop talking and chatter, like that. And what happened with her, we changed her diet. We got everything, kind of got her bumped up to where she could get pregnant. She went on a cruise, and on the cruise, she was just sitting and relaxing and in the sun, and she got pregnant on the cruise because she finally settled down. But I felt like it was because we had taught her the good diet and how to balance the Vata, that she needed that final thing. So if that kind of thing happens, it's usually because you've done a bunch of other work, and then that's like the final straw, kind of like in reverse. Some people tell me, ever since I ate that gluten, I've been sick for the next 10 years. And it can't be that one time you ate a piece of toast, you're sick for 10 years. But when you look at their history, it was building up to it, building up, this antibiotic, that birth control pill, damaging that. And then that was the straw that broke the camel's back. So the other could be true in reverse.
Definitely. There always has
Yeah.
to be a foundation, and then the right environment starts to be created after a lot of time and practices have been instilled in place.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am so grateful for all of this info and talking about clients and their imbalances, and I know it'll be really inspirational for our community. And just because you're a seasoned Ayurvedic practitioner, and I think a lot of Ayurvedic practitioners listen to this podcast, and our relationship with Ayurveda, I feel, really evolves. And so I would be so curious and love to hear, what is your current relationship with Ayurveda? And other than your practice and all the clients that you see on a daily basis, how do you connect with the science?
That's a good question, because the ancient doctors of India said this. They said, we can't envision what will happen in the future. So we're going to depend on the future doctors of Ayurveda to write new chapters.
Mm.
So when my teacher came from India, he had never been to America. I was the first doctor he trained. So he came in, he brought all the Ayurvedic herbs. He said, I'm going to teach you how to detox the patients. I'm going to teach you all the herbs. And so he started taking their pulses, and by the end of the day, he stopped and he turned to me, he said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do, he said. And he's this great formulator of herbs, award-winning, from a 5,000-year-old lineage of Ayurveda, was sent to America to make herbal formulas for the first Ayurvedic company here at MAPI. And he said, I don't know what I'm going to do, because he said, you guys can't take the herbs because you guys have such a poor diet. He told me what he ate growing up. It was beautiful. His mother made flatbreads every day. They had no leftovers. She made yogurt. They didn't even refrigerate it, and lassis and buttermilk and homemade paneer, fresh lentils. And I told him what I ate, margarine and Tang and, instant milk that you put water in. And he said, oh my God, like he couldn't believe how we ate here. So he said, the combination of your poor diet and the overuse of pharmaceuticals. See, in other countries, when I take on a new patient, I'll ask them, how many flu shots have you had? In America, it's usually 10, 20, 30. In other countries, it's like, oh no, we don't get them. How many years have you been on the birth control pill? In this country, it's like 5, 6 years, 10, 20, 30 years. In other countries, it's like, oh no, we don't take that. So here we're overusing medicine. In other countries, they don't. They go to their herbs first. This is what we need to do. So he said, besides the combination of too many pharmaceuticals and a processed diet, the liver is so agitated. It's holding on to so many toxins. And these toxins are very hot, like all these chemicals and the pharmaceuticals, all the trans fats we ate and hydrogenated oils growing up, bad sugar, bad salt. He said that the liver now, when you swallow anything, the liver has to process it. So when the food comes in, it's turning it into a poison. We call it amavisha in Ayurveda. He said, and then when the herbs come in, it's going to do the same thing to them because they're basically food. So he said, we have to figure out another way to get the herbs in people because the liver's so hot and angry. Many of the herbs like ashwagandha, shilajit, and many others heat the liver so much, and it's already raging hot out of control. He said, and not only that, the liver's going to just take these good herbs and turn it into poison. And it took him about 4 years. During that time, we didn't know how to treat the patients. We would try some herbs and they would get worse. And so then he developed what are called these little herbal nectar drops, where he just gathered the vibration of the herb, kind of like the Bach flower remedies that just have the vibration of what that flower or herb does. And it has the same benefits as if you took the original herb, but the liver doesn't have to process it because it's just vibrational and it goes into all the gaps in between the cells and it has an immediate effect. So that was one thing. And he made about 150 of those with all the herbs. The other way was transdermal, where you take the herb, rub it on the skin, and it goes directly in to the bloodstream from the skin, and it's not involving the liver at all. From that point on, we were able to treat everything. And that's when we started lecturing around the country. I started writing books, and things really took off. And even the cleansing techniques. He oversaw the Panchakarma clinics in the United States. Panchakarma is the premier Ayurvedic cleansing technique. And he said that it had to be revamped because the toxins we're holding on to nowadays are so hot that when you pull them out, they have to travel through channels into the bowel movement, urine, and the sweat to come out. So if you're pulling them out of the bone marrow, the liver, the brain, they're going to go through channels. He said these toxins are so dangerous that they could rupture the channels. So he also had to revamp Panchakarma. So at every level, how we take the herbs, we had to change up the diet, and then how we do the cleanses, he had to revamp it, and then things were good to go. So that's the level of Ayurveda I'm practicing now. It's kind of like when you learn any technique or anything like poetry, you have to learn the basics and then you have to break those rules and then do what's necessary for this time. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and that's what I love about your practice too, is that you're not so into the dogmatic of this has to be exactly how it was written in the books, because truly all of the Vedas, even yoga, it's meant to be dynamic by nature. So it's meant to interact with that person and be relative to those specific times. But like you said, when you pull back and you look at the context and the principles he's still using, it's all aligned with Ayurveda. But now we're just given what the relative field is about right now.
That's right. Yeah. And he made all his formulas straight from the ancient Ayurvedic texts. Yeah.
Mm.
That where it still contains the prana. In fact, that was his mission. It's a shame he passed on too early, but he wanted to take, people are taking these nutraceuticals. So he would take something like alpha lipoic acid, and he knew how to make it from spinach and broccoli. So he was making those things in a natural version. So what he got to do was B12, alpha lipoic acid, and coenzyme Q10. So it's just a shame. He was on a path to do more, but then he passed away.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Marianne, for all of this beautiful wisdom and the work that you do in your practice. I know it's so inspirational for our community, and I would love for you to share how our community can further connect with you and get to work with you.
You can just Google my name, Dr. Marianne Teitelbaum, and you'll see I have two links on there. One says videos, and I kind of highlight, they're 10-minute little videos, all the different diseases and the way we would approach it versus what modern medicine would do. And there's another link that says classes where they're 1-hour lectures. So you could learn a little more about what we do. But there we have our, telephone number and how to reach us if you're overseas or whatever. Mhm.
Yes. And I can attest, I absolutely love working with you and the herbs and the way in which you share Ayurveda. It just feels so holistic and feels so aligned with my intuition. And I'm just so grateful for the work that you do.
Thanks. And thanks again for having me. I love to share what we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I will see you next time.